All right, hello, and we are going to get back to more of your questions. All right, so we're going to start with a long one from Boofy777. Wow, I was very intrigued by the TWDU theory of Beth making it to France for research or treatment. This is actually very, very plausible. Though France is most famous for romance art, haute couture, etc., it is also a major player in medical research. I wrote a research paper on this topic years ago and did some deep diving now. I will try to keep things concise by using bullet points. Louis Pasteur was a famous French microbiologist who is given credit for linking disease to microbial sources as a causative agent, and also in developing vaccines for smallpox and rabies. Rabies' late stages often presents as staggering around, foaming at the mouth, mild to moderate aggression, sounds sort of like a zombie, right? Smallpox wiped out millions of people before the vaccine, like with the Walker virus. Another English scientist was also involved in vaccine development. His name was Edward Jenner. In S1 at the CDC, we had scientist Edwin Jenner, no coincidence, who also spoke of working with French scientists, and that these French were close to a cure. Number 3, in honor of Louis Pasteur, the Pasteur Institute was founded, which continued to be a forerunner in medical research. In fact, the Institute won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008 for successful isolation and identification of the HIV-1 virus, the virus which causes AIDS. The Institute scientists have also been awarded 10 Nobel Prizes for medical research. Pretty impressive, right? The Pasteur Institute has also founded a research network which involves 25 other countries. Dr. Stephen Edwards at Grady, there's the Edward again, but he is a real person. His professional bio states he has more than 25 years experience in pharmacology and toxicology across academia, government, and industry. You can read the full bio here. Edwards made comments to Beth about being bored since he no longer had research to conduct, yet he had guinea pigs. 6, if Beth were bitten, immune, being treated, remember the heparin drip, used as a research model, etc., we can see how France and research opportunities there could play an important role, and maybe why, of all the countries in the world, Daryl ended up there and not Ceylon, Australia, China, etc. So, how did she get there? The powers that be already showed us one way on a slow boat. However, there are planes out there just sitting and people who can fly them. We saw this in S3 with the helicopter group the governor killed. With the Pasteur Institute, or what passes for this entity in the show, having associations in other countries, it would not even have to be a long, continuous journey. It could just be hops, skips, and jumps, aka planes, trains, and automobiles. It seems that all of this has roots in the first season of the show. Now, of course, there was a different showrunner, Frank Darabont, in place at that time. Written electronic and verbal communication on the future plots could have occurred, including collaboration with Robert Kirkman or not. Or it could be that when Gimple took over, he saw these details as stepping stones for a much bigger story he chose to stick with and flesh out over the long haul. We'll never know. But if any of our past theories over the years of Beth being bitten, being immune, used for research, the Christ figure to save humanity, etc., is true, it seems Beth ending up in France could make perfect sense. Thank you for reading this, and I do hope you will share some feedback of your own. Yeah, absolutely. This is really well laid out, and so I appreciate that. Galadriel Jones has done a lot of research on the medical implications as well. So yeah, let me go through this a little bit at a time. So it's really interesting that the diseases that French scientists are known for are very similar to the Walker virus. I'd never actually heard that angle before. I did know about Edward Jenner being very similar to Edwin Jenner. And then with the Edwards at Grady, I mean, I don't think that there's any way that can be a coincidence, like you say. They're using the names of famous French scientists in order to hint at the France angle. And that is something we couldn't really have picked up back then. Not until we learned that they were like going to France and we had the coda of The World Beyond, where you had the French scientists actually speaking French. At that point, people went back to season 1 and went, oh, he did talk about the French and their scientists and how they kind of held on the longest and thought they were close to a cure, right? I do think that they were always planning on that, at least in some iteration. I don't think there's any way they could have known in season 1 or 2 that they would later be filming in France. Like, I don't think it was that well planned, but I think that they were always going to use that angle because of the names, you know, because we have the scientist in season 1 that was at the CDC, but then if they were using a real name, Stephen Edwards, then clearly in season 5, they were already heading toward that. And guys, this is another reason, yet another thing that I just don't think we can get away with. This is almost proof in my opinion. We talked about how there were a lot of clues, both at Grady and then again in Tyrese's death hallucination, to the CRM. And so it was a foreshadowing of that. But if there is a famous French scientist and they used his name for the doctor at Grady, that is a foreshadow that something to do with Grady is linked to something that is going on in France. Okay? And that is why we 100,000% think that Beth's storyline will be continued in this arc, you know. And maybe we'll see her in France, maybe not. Maybe we won't see her till Spain. That doesn't mean that she wasn't in France at some point. I mean, what if it's something where we get flashbacks from a character that is not Daryl or Carol? We get flashbacks. And in fact, you know what? We actually are pretty sure we're getting flashbacks of Jeanette, because there's someone who looks like her when she's younger. We might be getting her past. What if Beth is in those flashbacks? Daryl would have no way to know that Beth was in those flashbacks, right? And anyway, I don't know if that's what's happening. I'm just saying it's a possibility. Anyway, so yeah, there was research, from what we can tell, going on at Grady. We're pretty sure. I mean, because Edward said that, right? Well, he said he was drowning in research, but he was bored because he didn't have anything new to do. The guinea pigs are also, I mean, guinea pigs, literally, we use that as a figure of speech for someone who is like the dry run. You know, we'll say, oh, they're the guinea pig, but we use it for everything. Oh, I'm making a new recipe. You're going to be the guinea pig. I'm creating a new course. I want you to go through it for me. You're the guinea pig, right? Guinea pig is a way of saying that some sort of experimentation is going on. So it's like a rock skipping across a pond, right? We had the helicopters in season 1. We saw them again in season 3 with a military outfit, and the CRM is a military part of the CR, right? Then we had what was going on at Grady. We had Beth. We had the fact that somebody always seems to be watching them in season 5, okay? And then we skip forward and we have other clues throughout the seasons, and then we have Rick disappearing into the CRM, and now we've got Daryl in France and all these French scientists who are known for this kind of experimentation and medical stuff, which was going on at Grady. And we have people, of course there was the CDC, but then we have the doctor at Grady who named himself a research scientist who has the name of a very famous French research scientist, and now Daryl and Carol are in France, and Emily is making all these suspicious remarks about Beth coming back. And you see what I mean? Like, I just can't say, oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we know. It's all here. It's all laid out for us, guys. So that's all I'm trying to say. Let's see. Oh, even the fact that you say that they're a network in other countries is interesting. Number one, because especially Galadriel Jones has theorized a lot about the CRM in other countries. Just looking at some of the things they have, like they had to have imported that from somewhere. Why would they have that in terms of supplies and food and things like that? So we've theorized that they have a lot of bases and contacts in other countries, and maybe the CRM is actually a whole lot like the Roman Empire, where it's so big and so sprawling, and technically it's all part of the same organization, but it's so big that it's not very well integrated, and so you have different factions in different areas that run things different ways. And that could explain why it seemed to get so tied up with a bow with Rick and Michonne in The Ones Who Live. That doesn't mean that they're not going to go to war with parts of the CRM later on. You know, it doesn't mean that. And especially if they're involved in a lot of other countries. So what if, you know, the CRM and Jeanette's organization and different places in different countries are all involved in this research, trying to figure something out for the cure, and they just haven't hit on it yet? Yeah, I mean, Beth could totally be a part of that, and she might have visited a lot of different countries. We just don't know. Yeah. I'm just reading through what you wrote again, make sure I don't miss anything. Lots of different ways she could have gotten there. They will figure something out. I'm not worried about that. Yeah, I think I addressed most of it. But yeah, you're right that it does make perfect sense, and I really like the way that you laid all of this out. Is really, really insightful. And yeah, I think 100%. I don't think we can logically say that the writers aren't pulling from this history now, because there's too many things that line up. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I totally agree with you. All right. Hi, I was in TikTok and I saw something interesting. Said that the place in season 10, when Daryl and his group fighting the Whisperers, it's Grady Hospital. I actually don't know if it's really the same place or not, because they look similar. So I asked you if you know. Yeah, it was. It was, so that's the episode, I want to say it's called The Tower. It's the one, I mean, there's like 2 episodes. I think it's a 2-parter where Beta is killed. And yeah, it was filmed at the same hospital where Grady was filmed. Honestly, I still have a lot of questions about the symbolism in those episodes, because, at the time we knew that Beta was very much a proxy for Beth in a lot of ways. Even though he was evil, he was sort of an what do I always call that? An anti-parallel to Beth, because we saw a lot of parallels, but he's evil and she's obviously not. He was a singer. He was called Half Moon. I mean, Emily sang a song, the turtle, what is it? The turtle and the monkey and the turtle. I'm probably not saying that wrong, right? And that was actually in the show. That was a song that Beta as Half Moon sang, but they had Emily record a version of it. So there was all kinds of really suspicious hints going on, and the fact that that was filmed at the same hospital, was really suspicious. And I know that we saw a lot of really interesting symbolism in those episodes. There were cats. I think there was a dead possum at one point, on and on. But at the end of the day, I mean, obviously she didn't show up there at the time. We were hoping it meant that she would show up. She didn't. And it's one of those things, I almost feel like I want to go back and rewatch that now, because we know a lot more than we knew then. And I'm just not, I didn't ever feel satisfied that I could fully articulate the reason that they used the hospital, and oh, okay, well, this is what they're trying to show. I was still really wishy-washy on it. So I couldn't really say that, and it's something that I do need to go back and revisit. But it definitely was the same hospital. And one other thing that jumps out at me that I remember is that Angela Kang was ridiculously pleading ignorance about that. Somebody asked her about it, and we're going, is that the same hospital? And she kind of did this, I don't know, was it? I don't know, it might be. She really tried to kind of play it off, and it's that is the most ridiculous thing she could have said, because as the showrunner, she has to approve everywhere they film. So not only would she have approved that, she probably picked it out. And there's a very, very specific symbolic reason that they used the hospital there. It was Beta's death. So you could, I guess maybe in a very simplistic way, you could argue that it's just because Beta was a very big proxy to Beth, and that's when he was getting killed off. And as far as the audience knows, and Daryl knows, the last time they were at this hospital, Beth was killed, even though we, believe she lived and she's coming back. I think there was probably more to it than that. Similarly, this is another thing that just kind of made me chuckle and shake my head. They remember that when Daryl killed Beta, he stabbed him in the eyes, both of his eyes with daggers, and it was pretty oh, yikes, and a fairly fitting end for Beta. He was a big villain, and they tried to play it off like Norman and Ryan, the 2 actors, came up with that. And I just have to laugh at that. I mean, I'm not saying that maybe they didn't help come up with it, and I'm not saying that they are lying or were not involved. 100%. We know that Norman is very involved with the creative aspects of it, but they play it off like they let the actors choose how the episode ends or something, and that is not the case. I can just see that they're using that as misdirection, and because it is so highly symbolic, trust me, the writers, meaning Kang, and yes, all the way up to Gimple, they know exactly what is going on there. They have approved that symbolism. They're using it, and that's not to say that they don't get the actors involved. I mean, I can see them saying something like, okay, well, we want to do eye symbolism because Beta is a proxy for the serious character in some way, and then, they bat ideas around, and maybe, Norman and Ryan really did come up with that. But I'm just saying, they're not writing the story, and for the writers to insinuate that they are not signing off and very, very heavily involved in every single bit of symbolism that is going into the episode is ridiculous. Anyway, so that's what I remember, is that TD was really I think we were laying it on pretty thick back then and going, okay, but we've got Beta, and he sings, and he's half moon, and there's this, and there's that, and there's all the symbolism, and now they're at Grady, and what is that? And I think it was making the writers very nervous. And so they were very much like trying to distract us and play things off really nonchalantly and that sort of thing. So anyway, your question was a little more simple than that. Was that the same hospital? It was. And that is actually an abandoned hospital that a lot of productions film at. So it's not surprising they would use it over and over again, but I think it was very significant, and I need to revisit it to kind of fine-tune my understanding of it. So, but thank you for the question. Good insert time of day here. I was wondering about your thoughts on Grady and all the questions we still have. It feels like we never got to find out what was truly going on there. Why Dawn was so convinced that someone was going to save them. The full tea with Hansen. Why Edwards thought Dawn would get rid of him if another doctor came along, and all that. You do have a page on your theory links under unanswered questions, but it seems to be broken. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll look at that. Also, I'm unsure if things at Grady would have really changed much after Dawn was killed. Seems too sketchy of an operation for the next leader to not have an ego over all that control. So the biggest thing, and I've talked about this in past videos this week, so maybe go back and listen to a few of those to get a better idea. But the biggest thing is that we do think that Grady is linked to the CRM and also possibly to medical research that's going on, possibly in France. As I discussed, when it comes to the French research, they were using names of famous French scientists, which does link Grady to France and to research that seems to be going on into the cure, and it might be going on all over the world in several countries. And so that could be why we're seeing Daryl go to France and why we're going to see them go to Spain. I think this has all been worked out well in advance. And so I've told this story before, but when I was watching season 5, when the episodes came out and I was watching it, I remember watching episode 4, which was Slabtown, and thinking that I just had so many questions. There were so many things that they were being really nebulous about and not explaining. What was really going on with the ward system? Like you say, what the heck is going on with Hansen? And why is Dawn saying these things? And you know what I mean? Like all these, it's like they're hinting at them, but they don't really come out and say them. Why did Edwards feel so threatened by Trevitt? And Dawn told him to grasp the stakes, and then she smacked Beth in the face, but we're not actually told what the stakes are. Like, what is she thinking about when she says that? What is she referring to? All of those. But I assumed when I was watching it that we would get all those questions once Daryl and Rick and everybody got there to rescue Beth and Carol. I thought it would that would be blowing the whole thing wide open and we'd understand. And then, of course we were all kinds of distracted by the fact that Beth was shot, but they didn't really answer any of those questions. And once again, Gimple doesn't do that, right? Gimple was the day-to-day showrunner back there during that season. And I, once again, draw your attention to the fact that he brought Morales back 8 seasons later just to kill him off because he was a loose end, okay? Gimple does not leave loose ends. So where I'm going with that is just that these questions have to be answered eventually, and they will be. We're just waiting for them to be answered. But I think now that we're getting into France and maybe getting into the research that has been hinted at so heavily, that was definitely a part of Grady, we're going to finally start to get some of these answers. So my thoughts on Grady are that they were just a very small faction that is part of something much bigger. So when Dawn was saying somebody's going to come rescue us, this is another thing that's interesting, that people don't really ask this very much. And I guess it's because we assume something, and it's exactly what the writers wanted us to assume, so they did their job very well. Dawn keeps talking about someone coming to rescue them, and Beth thinks that's ridiculous. And she's going, there's nobody out there. Nobody's coming for us, and we have to figure this out ourselves. The odd thing is that Dawn doesn't answer. And that's really, really strange when you think about it, because if Dawn knows that there's nobody out there and this is just like a hope on her part, you would still think she would argue for it. She would be like, well, you know, you never know. We heard that the National Guard was still, you know what I mean? But she doesn't say anything. And it's like, okay, if this is what you're arguing, do you actually have an argument? And she doesn't give one. Now, on the flip side, if there is somebody out there, you would still think that she would say that. No, actually, we've been in contact with people. They're promising that they're going to come get us, yada, yada. She doesn't say that either. But I think that the writers didn't want her to say that. Like, they don't want us to know that. They are hinting at it, but then they're just kind of leaving it hanging like a ellipses at the end of a sentence. Like, nobody's out there coming, right, Dawn? ... And then there's just never really any answer. So I think that they were hinting, okay, number one, that they were doing research, and maybe they were doing that on behalf of a larger organization. We do know with the CRM that there is a price of admission, right? You have to bring someone in order to secure your place because they have limited supplies, limited resources, right? So maybe somehow Dawn or somebody at the hospital, maybe Hansen before her, had gotten a hold of the CRM, had been in touch with them. Maybe it has to do with the research. And maybe they were told that they needed to do X amount of research and have X amount of research subjects and to have done all of the work on that. And then they would be let into the CRM on the strength of that research and what they had uncovered. And that's why they're kidnapping people. That's why they're taking weak people who can't get away because they want to hold them there as captives, but they're also going to be research subjects. If Beth was bitten and they managed to keep her alive without cutting off her arm, which is what we think happened, she would be a very valuable research subject. Not that she's cured necessarily, but she's someone who survived a bite. So that's going to be very valuable to people. That could be why she was shot. Maybe they didn't want her to leave, and they figured we can just kill her off, and as long as we shoot her high in the head and don't hit her brainstem, she'll be a walker, but that's still going to be really valuable research to someone. And if they're trying to get into the CRM or wherever, that would probably be worth it for them to keep her there at any cost, even if it means killing her. And guys, I'm just spitballing here. This is just stuff that we've discussed. I have no idea if this is how it will end up being, but these are possibilities based on the questions that have not been answered yet. So they're doing research. We think they were part of a whole. In terms of afterward, we don't really know. I mean, Edwards is still there, and he's the research scientist. Shepard, she kind of seemed like she would be the one to take the mantle, which was interesting. I mean, her name's Shepard, first of all, which suggests a kind of Christ connotation. And she was very down to earth, you know, and she wanted to get rid of Dawn because Dawn was toxic, and because she's the one at the end who was yelling and saying, you know, put your guns down. It was just about her. And to this day, we don't know what that means. It was just about her. Does she mean, it kind of seems like she means Dawn and that somebody was trying to take out Dawn. That's kind of what they're implying. But what if she doesn't mean Dawn? What if it was just about Beth? We don't know. Like, they were so vague about things. We don't know. Anyway, so the basic gist, again, is that they were part of a larger organization. And the writers were hinting at future storylines, hinting at what was going to be going on later on. So we have hints at the research. We have hints at France because of the names. We have hints of them being in communication with some other group that was telling them, we're going to come rescue you at some point. We haven't yet, or we aren't willing to yet, but at some point in the future we will. And especially the way that Dawn talked about that, like, we just have to buckle down and keep going until someone comes and rescues us. So, like, there's a timeline for this, when they've been told at some point in the future someone will come get them, and they just have to hang on till then. And then, of course, Beth was going, what are you talking about? I don't know that Beth was entirely in the loop about what was going on. I think she probably knew more than we, the audience, know. But she says, you know, she has that conversation with Dawn by the elevator and says, this is how it's going to be until the end. That's why you have to choose who you want to be now in this situation. So I don't think she was at all convinced that anybody was coming. You know, she was being truthful with Dawn when she said that. So the idea is that at some point, assuming she did return to Grady, which is what most people think after she was shot, Team Family left her behind. They ran. When they went back, she was gone. We think she is probably back at Grady, and we do have precedence for that because of Glenn being back at the prison in season 4 after Maggie thought he had left. And I'm assuming that if anybody at any point did come to get the people who were surviving at Grady, that they were absorbed into either the CRM or some sort of research group. In which case, Beth very well may have ended up in France if that is the center of the research effort. And we have a lot of evidence of that, both because of the mentions of the French in the pilot episode, but also because of the coda to The World Beyond and what the scientists were discussing there. So that's a very high-level view of what we think is going on with Grady and what all my thoughts are about it. I mean, I could go on for days and days and days, and this video is running long, but there's a lot of detail and a lot of nitty-gritty that I'm not getting into right now. I do want to touch on real fast Nicotero, and remember how he said several years ago, somebody asked him a question, are the people at Grady still there? And he did very suspiciously, I think the people at Grady are probably dead. Yeah, they're probably dead. Anyway, and then he moved on to another question, right? So it was very blustery and him trying to come up with something. And I said at the time, I think he could be telling the truth, that maybe the Gradians had all died by then. That doesn't mean Beth is dead. That doesn't mean that we won't return to that storyline. I think in a lot of ways it's an indication that they're no longer at that hospital. Again, because they might have finally had somebody come pick them up and gone someplace else. It also could be that a really big theory back in season 5, because we had the Beth flash in the credits where she's running, was that she would escape from Grady in some capacity. And, so it also could be that some other group came through and murdered most of the Gradians, but a few people got away. Beth got away. But who would that be? Would it just be some renegade group, or could it be a faction of the CRM who came in to murder the doctors and take all of their research and the research subjects? I mean, that's a possibility too. So we could go any which way with it. This is why there's so many headcanons and so many fan fictions and all of that, and we just have to wait for them to actually return to the storyline and tell us what it is. But that is the basic gist of what I think is going on there. All right, I will call it for today. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Feel free to send some more in. I think that's the end of what I have right now as of the recording of this, but I am going to try to do videos in the next week or so talking in more depth about the preview and the sneak peek and some other things that have come up recently. So I'll be back soon. Bye, guys.